80 years ago this month, the Shoah finally ended. And after the bombs were dropped on Japan in August of 1945, the world realized that 50 million people were left dead in the war's wake. And we know all too well that 6 million Jews were killed in factory genocide. Would this catastrophe of all catastrophes wake up humanity and mark the end of human-caused suffering? That was the hope. But alas, history kept moving on. We learned that the Allies were not entirely righteous. Even us, the Americans, interred the Japanese, persecuted German Americans who were loyal to America, and Stalin was a genocidal maniac as well. And came about the Billy Joel song, "The Fire Kept Burning," even after 1945. Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia killing fields, race riots, apartheid, oppressive regimes on both the left and the right on every single continent. Joel wrote his song in 1989, conveniently, with Tiananmen Square and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Would that finally be the end of suffering? No more Cold War, perhaps democracy in China. But we know the fire kept burning. In fact, the group Fall Out Boy, I'm sure with permission from Joel, put out a new version in 2023. It has plenty of disasters: OKC bombing, Columbine, 9/11, Boston Marathon. It could have had more: Rwandan genocide, the Balkan War, homicide bombers in Israel. If you know the song, the chorus goes, "We didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning." I'm not going to sing it. "We didn't start the fire. No, we didn't light it. We tried to fight it. We couldn't put it out." And the song ends with the fading refrain, "But when we are gone, it will still burn on and on and on." The fact that the fire of human suffering seems to be inextinguishable can be depressing and lead to feelings of despair. With all that is going on even today in 2025, and yes, being surrounded by the media climate that we are in, I have to admit that I sometimes have feelings of despair. Can we do anything to mitigate human suffering and the injustice that can be found in all corners of our earth? And even if we can fix the world just a little bit, how do we move on with daily life? An answer came to me this week when I rewatched Elie Wiesel's Nobel Peace Prize speech from 1986. As many of you know, the Shoah Committee has been doing a series of book clubs, and I've really been fortunate to be asked to lead them. I wasn't a reader growing up, or not my forte, but it's really been something of love and discovery for me to be able to read books and to discuss it with people. And we purposely chose on this 80th anniversary of the end of the Shoah to read Elie Wiesel's Night. It's not that long of a book, about 100 pages, 150 pages, but it's notable. Worse, because it was published in 1958, just 13 years after the end of the Shoah. It was one of the first accounts of the Shoah. In 1958, the majority of the survivors were still unable to share their stories. They had compartmentalized it back in here. They came out in nightmares, we know that, but they were unable to share it publicly, often even hiding it from their families. But Wiesel back then had the wisdom and strength to be a trailblazer. And in this short, succinct, poignant account of the horrors, he led us to recognize that we can never let this happen again. And after night, he took on the mantle of leadership to put out the fires of hatred that allowed the Shoah to occur. For these efforts, obviously, he won the Peace Prize in 1986. And in his speech, he acknowledged that human suffering and anti-Semitism was burning just as strong in 1986. He could actually give that same speech today, just change a couple geographic areas, give a different couple of leaders. Wiesel described how surviving the war gave him a mission to speak up in the name and memories of all those who did not survive, especially the children. He told the world that the opposite of love isn't hatred, it's apathy. And that even in the complicated world of national sovereignty and terrorism, we must speak up. Wiesel even brought up the Palestinians. 1986 was the PLO's heyday of terrorism. After Munich, after the Lebanon War, Yasser Arafat was sitting in Libya planning his next attack. And Wiesel adds his unwavering support from Israel. The Jews need a refuge. They need to defend themselves because they were left alone to suffer during the Shoah. And yet, he acknowledges as a humanitarian the plight of the Palestinian people. And he emphasizes that terror and violence are never the answer. He has a dream that the two sides would come together and make peace, one that still hopefully is lasting. And Wiesel vows to keep speaking up and urges the listeners to keep speaking up as well. It's clear he's not going to be able to end suffering, but does Wiesel despair? No. He concludes his speech just as he began it, with gratitude. He began his speech by putting on a kippah and saying Shechianu. And then he ends his speech by reminding us that every breath we take is an act of grace from God. The God that he still believes in. In the book Night, he kind of wavers. He argues with God, but he recognizes that God is the source of grace and the source of love. And so he says we need to shine God's light and love on the world through our actions. This past week as well, we had Jessica Steinberg from the Times of Israel come to speak, and it was right after Idan Alexander was freed. And she had corresponded with that family and many of the other families and was able to personally call them after Idan came home. And she described that in these last 600 plus days, Israel has wavered between normalcy, despair, and hope, all of the above. A basketball coach who won a championship and says, I don't want to play another game if we don't have the hostages home. There's despair there. There's hope there. Fire can be destructive, but fire can also warm and nurture. As long as we live, I learned from Wiesel, as Am Yisrael exists, the Ner Tamid that we read about burns on outside and inside and nourishes us. Yes, there are fires of destruction nearby, but if we love humanity and we do not despair and do not have apathy and speak up, then we don't fall into the fires of hatred. We can be warmed by the fires of love. And hopefully that fire will be infectious enough to spread and improve the world. So take each moment, each ray of grace, move through the world with love, speak up with what you can, and do not despair. Shabbat Shalom.